The evacuation alarm screamed through the corridors of Research Station Omega-7, its piercing wail echoing off metal walls that had never been designed to contain such panic. Marcus wiped his weathered hands on his maintenance coveralls and watched through the observation deck as the last transport ship disappeared into the star-speckled void, carrying with it every soul who had called this place home for the past 3 years. Every soul except him. The Krell armada hung in space. Like a swarm of metallic locusts, their bioships pulsing with an organic rhythm that made Marcus's stomach turn. Intelligence reports had been clear. The insectoid race showed no mercy to prisoners, and their advance across the galaxy had left nothing but lifeless worlds in their wake. The evacuation had been swift, efficient, and apparently successful. Marcus laughed bitterly as he realized the truth. In their haste to escape, they had forgotten about the night shift janitor who had been deep in the lower maintenance tunnels when the alarm sounded. By the time he had climbed 6 levels through service shafts, the last ship was already sealing its doors. He had pounded on the hull, shouted until his voice cracked, but the roar of engines had drowned out his desperate pleas. Now he stood alone, in a facility designed to house 200 researchers, engineers, and support staff, watching death approach at sublight speed. The Krell would arrive in 18 hours. Marcus knew this because the automated systems helpfully displayed the countdown on every screen he passed. 18 hours to contemplate his fate. 18 hours to rage against the cosmic joke that had made him the forgotten man. But as he wandered the empty halls, passing laboratories filled with half-completed experiments and living quarters still warm with abandoned lives, something shifted inside him. The fear remained, coiled tight in his chest like a serpent, but alongside it grew something else, a stubborn, defiant anger that had sustained him through 43 years of life's disappointments. They had left him behind, written him off as acceptable losses in their calculations. The brilliant minds who had barely acknowledged his existence when he cleaned their offices and emptied their waste bins had departed without a second thought for the man who kept their world running. Marcus found himself in the main research lab, staring at Dr. Reeves's unfinished work on quantum displacement theory. The equations meant nothing to him. He had barely finished high school before economic necessity had thrust him into a life of manual labor, but he understood the passion behind them. He had seen it in the doctor's eyes during those late nights, when she worked alone, so absorbed in her calculations that she forgot to eat. The irony wasn't lost on him that he, a simple janitor who had spent his life cleaning up other people's messes, was now faced with the biggest mess of all. An entire war bearing down on him, and nowhere to run. Every great bond starts with a single moment of courage. HFY Chronicle Stories is just beginning, and your support matters. If you love emotional sci-fi tales, forbidden connections, and stories that stay with you, hit subscribe. It's free, and it helps us bring more stories from the stars to you. Marcus straightened his shoulders and walked to the station's central computer terminal. If he was going to die here, he wasn't going down without understanding what he was dying for. The research they had abandoned might be meaningless to him, but perhaps in these final hours, he could honor the work of people who had never bothered to learn his name. The station's computer systems welcomed Marcus with an authorization prompt he had never been cleared to pass. But the evacuation protocols had automatically elevated all remaining personnel to maximum clearance levels of failsafe that assumed any survivors would be critical research staff, not a forgotten janitor with calloused hands and an 8th grade education. What Marcus discovered in the files made his blood run cold. Research Station Omega-7 hadn't been conducting routine experiments. Hidden beneath layers of bureaucratic language and scientific jargon was the truth. They had been developing humanity's ultimate weapon. The quantum displacement cannon wasn't theoretical, it was 93% complete, requiring only final calibration and targeting protocols. The device could theoretically punch holes through space-time itself, creating localized implosions that would collapse matter at the subatomic level. The files contained simulation after simulation showing its devastating potential. A single shot could cripple a Krell bioship. A coordinated barrage could eliminate their entire invasion fleet, but the weapon required a living operator to complete. The neural interface calibration. The quantum field generators needed biological consciousness to properly align the displacement matrices, something about organic neural patterns being inherently quantum in nature. The researchers had been preparing Dr. Vance, the station's senior physicist, for the interface bonding when the evacuation order came. Marcus stared at the technical specifications, his mind reeling. They had abandoned the weapon that could end the war because they couldn't spare the time to complete one man's neural calibration. In their panic, they had doomed not just him, but potentially every human world the Krell would encounter on their relentless march toward Earth. 17 hours remained until the alien fleet arrived. Marcus descended to sub-level 5, where the quantum displacement cannon occupied an entire hangar-sized chamber. The device dominated the space like a sleeping giant, a crystalline core surrounded by concentric rings of exotic matter generators, each one humming with barely contained energy. Status lights blinked in complex patterns across its surface, indicating systems that were active, waiting, ready. He found Dr. Vance's preparation notes scattered across a nearby workstation. The neural interface process was supposed to take 72 hours of gradual conditioning, slowly adapting the human brain to quantum field manipulation. The margin notes were filled with concerns about the psychological stress on the operator, warnings about potential neural damage from rapid integration. Marcus read every word, understanding perhaps one sentence in 10, but gradually piecing together the larger picture. The neural interface wasn't just about controlling the weapon, it would fundamentally alter the operator's consciousness, expanding awareness across quantum probability matrices. The process was irreversible and potentially fatal. The files made it clear that even if the interface worked perfectly, the operator would be changed forever. Their consciousness would exist partially outside normal spacetime, able to perceive quantum fluctuations that drove lesser minds to madness. Dr. Vance had volunteered anyway, accepting that saving humanity might cost him his sanity. As Marcus stood before the towering weapon, he felt the weight of impossible choice settling on his shoulders. He was no hero, just a man who had spent his life in service to others, invisible and unappreciated. He understood circuits and hydraulics, not quantum physics and neural interfaces. The technical manuals might as well have been written in alien script, but he also understood something the brilliant researchers might have overlooked in their calculations. Sometimes the person who cleans up messes develops an intuitive understanding of how things break and how they might be fixed. Marcus began reading Dr. Vance's notes again, this time not trying to understand the science, but looking for the practical steps. What switches needed throwing? What cables needed connecting? What sequences needed initiating? He had 40 years of experience following technical procedures, of learning complex systems through repetition and attention to detail. 16 hours. Until the Krell arrived. If he was going to attempt this madness, he needed to start now. The neural interface chamber reminded Marcus of the medical pod his wife had died in 3 years ago, all curved surfaces and softly blinking monitors, designed to comfort while performing the impossible. He ran his fingers along the neural crown surface, feeling the microscopic connectors that would soon burrow into his skull. He had spent the last 6 hours methodically working through Dr. Vance's preparation checklist, following each step with the careful precision that had made him the best maintenance worker the station had ever employed. The quantum field generators were online and calibrated. The targeting systems were locked onto the approaching Krell fleet. All that remained was for someone to merge their consciousness with the weapon's quantum matrix. Marcus had always been practical about death. Sarah's cancer had taught him that some battles couldn't be won through wishful thinking or desperate bargaining with an indifferent universe. But Sarah had fought until her last breath, not because she believed she could win, but because fighting was what humans did when everything seemed hopeless. The irony wasn't lost on him that he might be about to join her sooner than expected, and through means far stranger than any cancer. The preliminary neural scans had revealed something unexpected in Marcus's brain structure. Years of repetitive maintenance work had created unusual neural pathways patterns that Dr. Vance's notes suggested might actually be beneficial for quantum interface integration. His mind had been shaped by decades of systematic thinking, of breaking complex problems into manageable steps, where a brilliant scientist might struggle with the weapon's quantum paradoxes. A maintenance worker might simply accept them as another system to be understood and operated. Marcus activated the interface sequence and felt the neural crown descend onto his head. The connectors were cold against his scalp, then warm, then something beyond temperature as they established contact with his nervous system. The chamber filled with a low harmonic hum that seemed to resonate in his bones. The first wave of expansion hit him like a physical blow. His consciousness suddenly existed in multiple states simultaneously. He was Marcus the janitor, but also Marcus the quantum observer, perceiving probability clouds that surrounded every atom in the chamber. The walls seemed to breathe with potential futures, some bright, some dark, all equally real until observation collapsed them into actuality. He could see the Krell fleet approaching, their bioships existing as writhing masses of organic possibility. Their intentions blazed across quantum space like beacon fires: hunger, conquest, the absolute certainty that all other life was meant to serve their expansion. They had consumed 17 civilizations, each one adding to their collective biomass and technological integration. But Marcus could also see something the Krell couldn't: the quantum threads that connected all living beings across spacetime. Humanity's consciousness was different from every other species they had encountered. Where most minds existed as discrete entities, human awareness created quantum entanglement across impossible distances. Every act of empathy, every moment of shared understanding, every bond of love created quantum bridges that the Krell couldn't perceive or comprehend. The weapon's targeting system interfaced with his expanded consciousness, and Marcus suddenly understood why the quantum displacement cannon required a human operator. It wasn't just about biological neural patterns. It was about the uniquely human ability to hold multiple contradictory concepts simultaneously, to find meaning in chaos, to create order through sheer stubborn determination. The Krell were 8 hours away now, close enough for Marcus to feel their individual consciousnesses like insects crawling across his expanded awareness. Their minds were hive-linked, efficient, utterly without the chaotic creativity that defined human thought. They couldn't conceive of a single individual choosing to sacrifice everything for strangers who had forgotten his existence. Marcus began the final calibration sequence, his enhanced perception guiding quantum adjustments that would have taken Dr. Vance months to calculate. His consciousness stretched across multiple dimensions, touching the fundamental forces that held reality together. He was no longer just Marcus the janitor. He was Marcus the quantum guardian, the forgotten man who had become humanity's last desperate gamble against extinction. The Krell fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their bioships pulsing with predatory anticipation. Marcus watched through his quantum-enhanced perception as they spread across local space like a malignant growth, each vessel alive with writhing organic technology that defied conventional physics. He could feel their collective consciousness. Now billions of individual minds locked into a hive structure that prioritized efficiency above all else. They had evolved beyond individual identity, becoming something closer to a living weapon system that consumed entire civilizations to fuel its expansion. The Krell had detected the abandoned research station and were approaching with cautious interest. Their sensors indicated significant quantum activity, suggesting valuable technology that could be integrated into their collective. They sent forward scouts, smaller bioships that moved with predatory grace toward what they assumed would be another easy harvest. Marcus felt the weapon's targeting system sync with his expanded consciousness. The quantum displacement cannon was unlike any weapon humanity had ever conceived. It didn't destroy through force or energy, but by convincing reality itself that certain matter had never existed. The quantum field generators would create localized implosions in space-time, erasing target vessels from all possible timelines simultaneously. But the weapon's true power lay in its operator's ability to perceive quantum entanglement patterns. Marcus could see the invisible threads that connected each Krell bioship to the others, the quantum resonances that maintained their hive consciousness across impossible distances. If he targeted those connection points instead of the ships themselves, he could theoretically sever their collective awareness and reduce them to confused individual organisms. The first scout ship entered the weapon's effective range. Marcus initiated the firing sequence, feeling quantum energy build around him like a gathering storm. His consciousness expanded further, touching probability matrices that extended across multiple dimensions. He was simultaneously the janitor who had been forgotten, the operator who would save humanity, and the quantum observer who existed between all possible states. The quantum displacement cannon fired, reality hiccuped. The scout ship didn't explode or disintegrate. It simply ceased to exist, taking with it a crucial node in the Krell hive network. The effects rippled backward through quantum space, severing connection threads that had bound thousands of individual Krell minds into their collective consciousness. Marcus felt their confusion like a physical blow. Suddenly disconnected from the hive, individual Krell found themselves experiencing independent thought for the first time in millennia. The sensation drove many of them into catatonic shock, while others began attacking their own ships in desperate attempts to re-establish the familiar comfort of collective awareness. The main fleet hesitated, their coordination shattered by the loss of crucial quantum communication nodes. Bioships that had moved in perfect synchronization now drifted without direction, their crews struggling to comprehend individual existence. Marcus fired again, targeting another connection hub, then another. Each shot sent waves of disruption through the Krell fleet as more hive nodes collapsed, freeing thousands of individual minds that had been locked in collective servitude for generations. But the quantum interface was exacting a terrible price. Marcus could feel his human consciousness fragmenting under the strain of existing across multiple probability states. Memories of his past life became increasingly distant. Sarah's face grew dim. His years of maintenance work faded into statistical probabilities. His very identity began dissolving into the quantum foam. The Krell were retreating now, their remaining ships fleeing in random directions as individual crews made independent decisions for the first time in their species' recorded history. But Marcus could see through quantum space that other fleets were approaching from distant sectors, drawn by distress signals that had propagated faster than light through their bio-quantum communication network. He had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The Krell's response would be swift and overwhelming. They would send everything they had to eliminate, the impossible weapon that could dissolve their collective consciousness. Marcus prepared for the next wave, his humanity slowly evaporating into quantum possibility, knowing that each shot brought him closer to complete dissolution while bringing humanity one step closer to survival. The quantum mathematics were beautiful in their finality. Through his expanded consciousness, Marcus could perceive the elegant equations that governed space-time itself, see how reality was nothing more than probability waves, collapsing into observable phenomena through the act of conscious observation. Was losing coherence rapidly now. His individual identity existed as scattered fragments across multiple quantum states, held together only by stubborn determination and the increasingly faint memory of why this mattered. Sarah's face had become a probability cloud. His years of maintenance work existed as statistical averages. Even his name was dissolving into quantum uncertainty, but he could also see something unprecedented. In the quantum foam, the Krell were changing. Across dozens of sectors, individual Krell, who had been freed from hive consciousness, were making choices their species had never imagined possible. Some were destroying their own bioships rather than return to collective servitude. Others were attempting to communicate with species they had previously considered only as potential biomass. The rigid efficiency that had made them humanity's greatest threat was crumbling as millions of individual minds experienced freedom for the first time. Marcus fired the weapon again, targeting the massive queen ship that served as the central node for an entire sector's hive network. The quantum displacement sent ripples across light years of space, freeing billions of minds in a single devastating stroke. The effect was catastrophic for Krell civilization. Their entire culture was built on collective consciousness. Their technology required hive-mind coordination. Their expansion depended on unified purpose. Without the binding force of shared awareness, their empire began collapsing from within. Marcus was paying the ultimate price for humanity's salvation. His consciousness was spreading across so many quantum states that he could barely remember what individual existence felt like. He was becoming something unprecedented, a human mind distributed across the fundamental structure of reality itself, existing simultaneously in all possible timelines. Through the quantum interface, he could perceive the long-term consequences of his actions. The Krell would never recover from the dissolution of their hive consciousness. Individual members of their species would eventually develop new forms of civilization, based on cooperation rather than absorption. Some would become humanity's allies. Others would retreat to isolated worlds to rebuild their shattered society. The war was ending, not through conquest but through liberation. Marcus initiated the weapon's final protocol, a quantum cascade that would propagate freedom throughout the entire Krell network simultaneously. It would require him to dissolve completely into the quantum matrix, spreading his consciousness across billions of light years to touch every hive node in their civilization. He thought of the researchers who had abandoned him, working frantically at some distant facility to develop weapons they would never need. He thought of Sarah, whose memory was fading but whose love remained embedded in the quantum structure of his dissolving consciousness. He thought of all the humans who would live because a forgotten janitor had chosen to clean up one last mess. Cascade began. Marcus felt his individual existence scatter across infinite possibility. He became the quantum observer who existed between all states, the consciousness that could perceive reality from every possible angle simultaneously. His awareness touched every Krell mind in the galaxy, gently severing the bonds that had held them in collective slavery for millennia. Freedom propagated faster than light through bioquantum networks that had been designed to maintain control. Across the galaxy, Krell awakened to individual consciousness for the first time, experiencing wonder, fear, and possibility in equal measure. The war ended not with humanity's victory, but with the liberation of both species from the patterns that had defined them. In choosing to sacrifice everything for people who had forgotten his name, Marcus had demonstrated the uniquely human ability to find meaning in chaos, to create hope from despair, to transform even death into an act of love. He existed now as something beyond individual identity, a quantum consciousness woven into the fundamental structure of reality itself, ensuring that freedom would always triumph over collective tyranny, that the forgotten would always have a voice, and that sometimes the most important heroes are the ones whose names nobody remembers. In the end, humanity survived not because they were stronger or smarter than their enemies, but because they were human, flawed, stubborn, and willing to sacrifice everything for strangers who might never know their names. The janitor had cleaned up his final mess, and in doing so had made the galaxy a cleaner place for everyone.